Chapter 61 Will You Marry Me? You are listening at novelfull.audio. After coming to terms with the Goths, Marcellus had honored his agreements. In the following days, the Gothic tribes flooded into Noricum, providing the Western Roman army with tens of thousands of new soldiers in the form of foederati. Without Roman resistance, they were given free rein over the lands. As for Illyricum, that would have to wait until it could be reclaimed from the east. In the meantime, Marcellus returned to Ravenna, which was the seat of his power. Before setting out on his journey to Ravenna, Sigefrida had instructed him to patch things up with Placidia. Of course, Marcellus had in actuality completely neglected to visit Placidia during that time. There were two reasons for this. One was he wanted to give the girl some breathing space. After seeing her so heated, he knew she was angry at him for not responding to her feelings. Because of this, she would need some time to calm down into a rational state. The second reason was he feared the girl hated him after so ruthlessly rejecting her. Luckily for him, that did not seem to be the case. The moment Marcellus arrived at the palace, Placidia was waiting for him, beside his lover Sigefrida. She had a heartfelt smile on her face as she witnessed the Marcellus return from a dangerous negotiation. Upon seeing that she was not the slightest bit angry with him, Marcellus took advantage of this opportunity to discuss with Placidia the matters he had thought deeply upon during the past few weeks. He started by addressing Sigefrida, who was the elephant in the room. "Sigefrida, do you mind if I have a moment alone with Placidia?" Sigefrida could take a hint, and immediately retreated further into the palace. It surprised Placidia to see Marcellus willing to speak with her. He did not even tell her he was going to go negotiate with Alaric. She was practically pouting as she scolded the man for making her worry. "I had to hear that you had gone to negotiate with the Goths from Sigefrida." "Really, Marcellus? Do I mean so little to you that you won't even tell me when you're departing on a dangerous journey?" Marcellus had a wry smile on his handsome face as he tried to deflect from the issue, without directly apologizing. "I didn't want to worry you about such petty matters." Such a comment only caused the young woman to pout even more. She practically snubbed the man as she walked past him with an indifferent expression on her lips. Marcellus laughed when he saw this, calling out to the girl as she walked by, enticing her with a question she could not so easily ignore. "Did you not want to hear my answer?" Placidia froze on the spot as she heard these words before turning around and witnessing the smile on Marcellus' lips. Her heart pounded heavily within her chest as she wondered what the man was going to say to her. She dreaded the idea that he would bring this matter up, only to reject her again. However, she did not flee, instead she stayed put, not daring to take another step. Upon seeing the girl behaving so docilely, Marcellus chuckled before making a long-winded speech on how he felt about Placidia. "You know how I lost my father as a young child. As a result, Stilicho was the man to raise me as if I were his own son. I believe it was a similar case for you, was it not? I remember the first time we met, you were no older than 5, and Stilicho had taken me along on another one of his errands. Gods, I must have still been a youth, but even then, that man was grooming me to take over his position one day. He took me everywhere with him, I aided him in all of his responsibilities, and yet there was always a certain time and place that he forbade me from accompanying him. Until that day, the day I found out, I had a little sister. Not by blood, but by virtue of being raised by the same man. You may not remember, but when you first laid eyes on me, you hid behind the legs of your maid, and were too frightened to even look me in the eye. You were such a cute little girl. I wanted nothing more than to protect you and make you happy. It was after that first encounter that Stilicho instructed me to spend time with you. Believing that it would be important for us to grow close, since your actual brother Honorius was such a rotten bastard. Since that day I looked after you, as if you were my own sister, and I had no complaints. When you confessed your feelings for me, even if it was inadvertent, it did not even register in my mind. I was so grief-stricken that I couldn't even fathom the idea that the girl I thought of as a sister had looked at me as if I were a man. In a year you will be old enough to wed, and despite my age, I have not found a suitable wife. After thinking about the issue for some time, I realized the perfect candidate had been around me since I was still a boy. Placidia, if you have no complaints, then on the day you turn of age, I would be happy to marry you. My mother is gone, and I know that Siegfrieda can never be anything more than my concubine. The only woman I have in my life is you. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is, will you marry me? It shocked Placidia to hear this long-winded response from Marcellus. She never expected him to return her feelings with a marriage proposal. However, she couldn't be happier. She instantly smiled and ran over to Marcellus, where she kissed him on the cheek, before responding to his question. Yes. Absolutely. Marcellus smiled as he heard this. He had dreaded the prospect of losing Placidia these past few days on his journey home from the Italian border. Luckily, she wasn't so angry with him that she had given up. Unbeknownst to Marcellus and Placidia, Siegfrieda gazed upon the heartwarming sight of the proposal with a broken heart. She knew that even if her master freed her from her bondage and granted her Roman citizenship, she could not marry the man. The difference in their status was simply too great. At most, she could be a concubine. Still, it filled her eyes with tears seeing the man she loved ask another woman to marry him. Had she been born in a position similar to Placidia, it would be her accepting Marcellus' proposal. Instead she was just the side chick, and nothing would ever change that. The barbarian beauty grasped hold of her collar and regretted being born a Suebi, and lamented the fact that she was nothing more than a slave. It took several moments for her to calm herself down, and get over the grief of realizing she would never have the life she desired. She was mature enough not to hold a grudge against Placidia for being born with a golden spoon in her mouth. Still, it was difficult for her to accept her lot in life. Siegfrieda knew she was the one to encourage Marcellus into marrying the girl, but it still stung her heart like a hive of wasps to actually witness him propose. Ultimately, she decided to let the happy new couple be at peace. She was sure that Placidia would not want to see her around so soon after being proposed to by the man they both loved. As a result, the Suebi beauty fled to the inner sanctum of the palace, where she washed her sorrows away with copious quantities of wine. As for Marcellus, he was quickly dragged away by an over-eager Placidia who wanted to discuss the details of their wedding. Despite it being a year away, she wanted everything to be perfect, and spared no time for organizing the event. By engaging himself to Placidia, Marcellus achieved two major political goals. Firstly, the fact that Marcellus' heir would have Theodosian blood in his veins may very well be enough to appease the Theodosian loyalists in Hispania who were currently rebelling against Constantine. If that were the case, he could rope them into his side in the conflict. Secondly, this union would also force the Eastern Roman Empire into a tough decision. As far as anyone was concerned, Honorius had died at the hands of his magister militum, Olympus, who sought to negotiate with the rebels to spare his own life. The fool had left no heirs. The closest male relative to him was the young boy, Theodosius II, who now ruled the eastern half of the empire. By marrying Honorius' sister, Marcellus was forcing the Eastern Roman Empire to choose between pressing Theodosius II's claim to the Western throne, or recognize Marcellus' right to rule over the western half of the empire. Either way, Marcellus' claim was strengthened by having Placidia as a wife. Chapter 62 Dreams of the Past Part 1 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Frank moaned in displeasure as he carefully stacked the red bricks on top of the cement, binding them together. He could not believe he was spending the weekend helping his father build a wood fire kiln, when he could be out hanging out with his friends. He was not shy and quickly voiced his discontent with the current situation. Why the hell am I the one stuck building this stupid thing? Can't Maria do it? I am in the prime of my youth and have other shit I could be doing. Frank's father Marco was not the slightest bit happy with the tone his son was using, and instantly smacked him over the head with his cement-encrusted hands. Watch your mouth, boy. You know how your mother loves her pottery. Her birthday is coming up, and I intend to gift her this homemade kiln so she can create all the porcelain she desires. Besides, this is your punishment for building a still in the garage. Did you really think your mother and I wouldn't recognize that fucking thing for what it is because you slapped a label on it that says for water purification only? What kind of rotten brains do you have in that head of yours? Frank muttered under his breath a swear word to his father, which did not go unnoticed. The man quickly put his son's priorities in order as he forced him to stack the red bricks. I heard that. How about I tell you what your mother told me about making bone china while we finish this fucking thing? Supposedly, according to your mother, all you need to make bone porcelain is a mixture of 25% kaolin, 25% petunsa, and 50% bone ash. After mixing this together, you form it to the shape you desire, and then fire it in a kiln heated up to 1260 degrees Celsius or 2300 degrees Fahrenheit. Once completed, you get a milky white, translucent product that is durable and easy to clean. You may not know this, kid, but at one point in our history, people considered such high-quality pottery an extreme luxury. Now quit your bitching and help me finish this fucking kiln. Frank ultimately did not stop his complaining, but he worked tirelessly throughout the day to help his father form a wood-fire kiln out of red bricks and cement that could heat to the necessary temperature to make bone porcelain. By the time the product was finished, he and his old man gazed at the kiln with a sense of accomplishment. Marco wrapped his arm around his son's shoulder and complimented him for his efforts. Well, you bitched and moaned like a little girl the entire time, but you took your punishment like a man. For that, I am thankful. Your mother will be damn happy to see such a fine birthday present. For this, I'll convince her to allow you to continue using your still. However, you are not going to be drinking on weekdays. Frank gazed up at his father with a shocked expression. He could hardly believe the old man was being so cool to him. He instinctively questioned the man's judgment. Are you serious? Marco glared at his son, as if he was looking at an idiot, before questioning the boy's intelligence. What? Do you morons actually think that you invented underage drinking? If there are two pastimes that we can hold dear as Americans, it is baseball and skirting the drinking laws. At least that nerdy friend of yours knows how to make some good hooch. Frank broke out into laughter when he heard this. For some reason, the old man's statement was just too amusing. Seeing that his son was laughing, Marco joined him, as the two men gazed upon their newest creation while drinking a few ice-cold beers in celebration of their achievement. Marcellus awoke from his slumber. Normally after having these visions he would be sweating profusely, and startled beyond reason. However, he simply sighed heavily this time, and accepted this as a test from the gods. If this vision was like the others, then he would have just come up with another means to produce income. He would have to test out this improved kiln design, and the so-called mixture for bone porcelain later on. He truly did not expect mere pottery to fetch such a large fortune. However, he would give it a try. Marcellus had yet to properly introduce his agricultural reforms across what little territory he currently held and had not even opened up a distillery. After all, he had to leave his prototype behind in Rhaetia when he raised his armies in rebellion against Honorius. He had more hopes in the production of distilled spirits than he did with this so-called porcelain. Still, if it was superior enough from the pre-existing pottery, he supposed it could fetch some form of price that would help aid in the development of the empire. Seeing that Siegfrieda was still asleep by his side, Marcellus decided to get up from his bed and go for a walk. He put on a pair of trousers before heading out the door to his bedchambers. The night sky was shrouded in clouds, and because of this, it was very dark out. He needed an oil lamp to properly see a few feet in front of him. Still, he did not waver and continued to walk across the palace before finding his wine cellar, where he opened up a flagon and poured its contents into a cup. Marcellus was surprised to see that another oil lamp was burning as he returned to the main portion of the palace. Placidia was wide awake, sitting on a sofa piece, reading from a book as she drank from a cup of wine. A slight smile curved on the man's face as he called out to the girl. You couldn't sleep either, huh? Placidia reacted in shock when she heard Marcellus' voice speak to her. She turned her head to see the sight of the man illuminated by his oil lamp. She noticed the glass of wine in his hands and smiled before raising hers as well. No, I was too excited to sleep. Since I couldn't rest, I decided to do something productive and read up on the history of our forebears. Did you know that our ancestors had contact with another powerful empire in the Far East called Serica? Supposedly, it is the land where silk originates from. There was no official interaction between our two empires, but it would appear some of our merchants had come in contact with those from the mysterious land. I wonder if they still exist out there on the other side of the world. Marcellus was an educated man and knew about the rumors of Serica. He sat down next to Placidia and took a sip from his cup while nodding his head in agreement. One day, I would very much like to visit that part of the world. However, to do that, I would need to unite Rome under my banner and defeat the Sassanids. Otherwise, it is simply inconceivable for me to reach that Far East. Too much stands in the way between us and them, and I fear that such ambitions would only be the fever dream of a madman. Placidia frowned when she heard Marcellus' response. She scolded him for giving up on his dream of expanding eastward. It is not just a dream. I am certain you have the ability to make it a reality. I know in my heart that one day you will be recognized as the greatest emperor that Rome has ever had. In response to this, Marcellus could only chuckle and pet the girl's head, which caused her to pout. I appreciate your idealism, Placidia. Perhaps if I ruled over the empire of Trajan, I might be able to conquer my eastern neighbors and reach the mythical land of Serica. However, I am plagued with an empire on the brink of collapse. Before I even think about bringing the Sassanids to heel, I must defeat Constantine, and force your nephew to kneel before me. It is not just a matter of conquest, inflation is at an all-time high, and the people are starving. Before I can turn my eye eastward, I must mend the wounds that ravage our civilization. Only when the empire is united in a state of its former glory can I think about bringing my sword to the east. Assuming I live long enough to accomplish these things, and am neither slain in battle nor betrayed like my forebears, then maybe, just maybe, I can gaze upon the land of silk with my own eyes. Until then, such a thing is nothing more than a dream, a hope to aspire to. You should get some rest, Placidia. It is not healthy to stay up all night. Placidia understood Marcellus' words, but she still believed if anyone was capable of such a feat, it would be him. Of course, she could not understand the full weight that was thrust upon Marcellus' shoulders the moment he rebelled against Honorius. He had made many enemies by usurping the throne of the West, and it would not be easy for him to survive. In the world of Romans, betrayal was all too common of an occurrence. Chapter 63 Submission of Africa. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The next day, Marcellus worked on the designs of his new vision, alongside a large distillery to be established in the city of Rome. Ravenna was a temporary capital as far as Marcellus was concerned. It only existed in such a prestigious position because times were desperate. When the past glory of the Roman Empire was restored, naturally its capital would be moved back to Rome. It was imperative that he begin the process of adding new sources of revenue to his empire. After all, the treasury was looking very thin these days, even after stealing the wealth of the senators who had opposed him. Inflation was on the rise, and the only real way to combat this was via a stronger currency. However, he lacked the gold and silver required to do such a thing. Currently, the common currency was so debased that the only real coins worth any value were the solidus, which was slowly but surely becoming less and less pure as the years passed by. To combat this, Marcellus had ordered that all new solidus being produced must be pure gold. The same standard was to apply to the millurents and siliqua, which were the two silver coins in use by the empire. Once he had established his distillery and porcelain manufacturing plant, he would be able to sell the wares across the Mediterranean and perhaps even to the Germanic tribes. The influx of wealth would hopefully stabilize his crashing economy. As for now, he had more important matters to deal with. thus after dispatching orders to Rome to implement the new technology in the pottery workshops, and to establish a large distillery. Marcellus descended from his study and entered the great hall where a man of a rather important position was waiting for him. This man was named Decimus Mamilius Carnifex, and he was the leader of the comitatenses stationed in North Africa. Marcellus had summoned him to Ravenna because he was uncertain where the man's loyalties lied. If he stayed in North Africa, then it was clear he was in open revolt. If he did as he was instructed, then it meant at the very least he was willing to entertain the idea of following the new emperor. Upon seeing the man in front of him, Marcellus opened his arms wide. Marcellus was no longer dressed in the trappings of a Roman general. Instead, he wore an imperial regalia made of silk imported from the East, dyed in Tyrian purple, and embellished with golden lining. It was a matter of prestige to wear purple, and Marcellus pulled off the look. He still wore his larica squamata and quilted leather subarmalis over the purple tunic. Though he may be in the safety of the palace, he was still a soldier at heart, and followed the rules that applied to soldiers in the field. Carnifex gazed at the man in front of him with a stoic expression on his chiseled face. He did not immediately bow to the emperor, nor salute him. Instead, he was gauging his character. He had heard rumors of Marcellus over the years, and the success the man had in battle. However, he never dreamed that the man would rise in rebellion. After all, he was always known as a loyal Roman. Truthfully, Carnifex did not care who was seated upon the throne in Ravenna, so long as North Africa was left in peace. He was born in the diocese Africi and had served in its army for many years, rising to his current position. However, the idea that Marcellus had used an army of barbarians to win his position, and quickly secured his rule by executing the Senate, did not sit right with the man. He only visited Ravenna because he was certain that despite his tyranny, perhaps Marcellus was the best chance of achieving peace in North Africa. Marcellus spoke to the man with a friendly tone in his voice, as he led him to the war room. "Carnifex, I was worried that you would deny my summons. It appears that was unnecessary. Please follow me. We have much to discuss." The North African general remained silent as he followed Marcellus into the war room, where the other generals of his armies were already gathered. Carnifex gazed upon the two Gothic chieftains, Sarus and Alaric, with a hint of disdain in his eyes. Whatever Marcellus had promised these men to secure their loyalty was a price Rome surely could not pay, or so he thought. As for the other two generals, one was a mere dux of the Limitanii in Rhaetia, and the other was an up-jumped centurion who had rapidly climbed the ranks solely because Marcellus had few men he could trust. Marcellus pointed at the map, which had figures of multiple men from various factions on it. The figures that represented the Gothic federati were moved to Noricum, where they sat on the borders of the Eastern Roman Empire, while the figures which represented Marcellus' legions were moved to the position of the Alpine passes which existed as the borders between Constantine's rebellion and Marcellus' dominion. The man could immediately guess what Marcellus had planned and spoke for the first time since entering the room. "You intend to use the federati to secure the borders in the east, and make our eastern brothers think twice before invading your territory, while at the same time using your new conscripts to march into Gaul. A bold move, but do you think your new troops are up to the task?" Marcellus smiled and nodded his head before answering the man's question with the utmost confidence. "Currently, they don't stand a chance. Constantine's forces are battle-hardened, and well-equipped. However, by summer of next year, I am positive that my new conscripts will be a proper legion, capable of overwhelming Constantine's forces. Besides, there is another factor we can take advantage of." At this moment, Marcellus moved three figures representing the Theodosian loyalists in Hispania, moving them into a position to trap and ensnare Constantine in Gaul. When Carnifex saw this, he scoffed at Marcellus before condemning him for his naivety. "Do you seriously believe that after deposing the Emperor Honorius, that the loyalists of the Theodosian dynasty in Hispania will side with you? They may be revolting against Constantine at the moment, but you're the man responsible for the death of the emperor they swore their allegiance to. Carnifex was beginning to fear for the worst as he analyzed Marcellus' plan. It was feasible for him to win, after some hard-fought battles against Constantine with his conscripts, but then he would have to put down the rebellion in Hispania with weakened forces. Not to mention the Federati could only stall the response of the Eastern Roman army for a limited time. However, Marcellus had a smug expression on his face as he informed all the men present of his ace in the hole. "I believe they will see reason when they learn that I have become engaged to Galla Placidia." The entire room was filled with shock as they heard this news. If Placidia had truly agreed to marry Marcellus, it was possible for him to convince the Theodosian loyalists in Hispania that he was the proper man to follow, especially if he maintained the lie that Honorius was only killed because of Olympus' treachery. With this in mind, Carnifex had transformed his opinion of Marcellus. Not only had the man deposed Honorius, but he had gained the loyalty of the Goths, and gotten the former emperor's sister to agree to marry him. Though Rome had been plunged into further chaos because of Marcellus' rebellion, the man had quickly stamped out any sign of rebellion after securing his rule and rapidly expanded his forces. In fact, they were in a better position to defeat Constantine's rebellion now than they had been when Marcellus was first dispatched to bring an end to his reign. It was because of this that Carnifex believed Marcellus might be the man's best fit for the position of emperor. At the very least, he was better than Honorius, who practically led the empire over the cliff with his inept rule. For now, Italia was secure from its enemies. Leaving the man with one question in his mind. "Say I join forces with you and submit to your rule. How will you make use of me?" In response to this, Marcellus merely smirked before giving the man the exact answer he was looking for. "I want only one thing from you, to guard North Africa from the enemies of Rome. So long as you do that, I will be satisfied. With my current forces, I have no intention of pulling you and your men from the diocese of Africa." Carnifex gazed over at the other men beneath Marcellus' command. Two of them were Goths, one was a semi-experienced frontier general, and the other was a man of little experience in being a lowly centurion. Despite this, the man in the center, who proclaimed himself to be the emperor, was probably the only man who could effectively lead Rome during its current crisis. If Italia fell, then so too would North Africa, and that would be disastrous for Carnifex. Thus he sighed heavily, before agreeing to Marcellus' condition. "Fine, I recognize you, Titus Claudius Marcellus, as the emperor of Rome, and swear my service to you. At the very least you're a better alternative than that fool Constantine." With this, North Africa had submitted to Marcellus' rule, which until now had been a question of contention for the new emperor. Though Marcellus had no plans of making use of the legion in the diocese of Africa, it was still a boost to his army, as well as his economy. Chapter 64 Constantine reacts. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Constantine stood perfectly still, as if he was completely lifeless. In his hands was a letter that his spies in Ravenna had sent to him. The news contained within the document was shocking, to say the least. Though Marcellus had done his best to prevent the spread of news pertaining to his successful rebellion, it was not something he could hide forever. Finally, weeks after taking the throne, butchering the Senate, and declaring himself emperor, the enemies of the newly crowned Western Roman Emperor found out about his successful rebellion against the previous emperor. Constantine could not believe that Honorius had been deposed, and by the man who nearly defeated him in Gaul just a year prior. A cruel smile curved itself upon the man's lips as he muttered the name of his new rival for the throne. Titus Claudius Marcellus, the nearby Frankish chieftain, gazed up at Constantine's troubled state while sharpening his knife. He cared for the briefest of moments before returning his sight back to the task he was performing. Ultimately, his gesture was interrupted by the mad laughter of Constantine, who had clearly gone insane. "Ha ha ha, that bastard has usurped the throne, while I'm stuck here in Hispania taking care of Honorius loyalists. What madness is this? Is it so easy to take Ravenna? It is no matter, I am the true emperor of Rome, and this incident has given me just what I need to compel these damned rebels to cease their hostilities. Honorius is dead, and the man responsible for his death now sits on the Western throne. If that doesn't get these bastards' blood boiling, then I don't know what would. Constantine's mind worked quickly, and he realized he could make use of this information to forge a new alliance. His intention was to inform the Theodosian loyalists about this recent occurrence and persuade them to join his side. After all, he believed that Marcellus' actions would outrage the men of Hispania, and compel them to align with himself, so that they could march on Ravenna together in an attempt to remove this new usurper. With this in mind, Constantine got off his ass and began marching through his siege camp, without saying a word to anyone else. This was not uncommon, as he was a man who rarely interacted with his soldiers. He slowly approached the gates of the city he was besieging with a white flag in hand. When the garrison gazed upon the sight of the self-proclaimed emperor so boldly approaching their gates, they considered whether they should open fire. After all, it was unlikely for a better opportunity to permanently remove the usurper to appear in the future. However, as the arrows were strung, and pulled back, the garrison's commander held up his hand, halting the archers from taking the shot. Instead, he quickly gave a shocking command to his men. "Open the gates." It surprised the soldiers to see their commander not take advantage of the current situation. However, they did not disobey. The gates were slowly raised, and the leaders of the revolt were alerted of the strange actions undertaken by the enemy commander. A delegation soon arrived in front of the city's gates where Constantine stood with a shit-eating grin on his face. He quickly called out to the man who was in charge of the Theodosian loyalists while tossing him the letter he held in his hands. "Tasius, my old friend, Honorius, is dead. It would appear that one of his generals rebelled against him and usurped his position. Tell me, knowing this, do you still desire to fight me until the very end?" The man named Tasius gazed at the usurper with a vicious look on his face as he read the words written on the paper. "The words of your spies mean nothing to me. I refuse to believe that the emperor is dead. If this is your grand scheme to get us to surrender, you will have to do better than that." Despite these harsh words, Constantine was not willing to admit defeat. He knew this news was accurate, and it was only a matter of time before it reached the Theodosian rebels from a source they trusted. Thus, he put his arms up in defense as he called for a ceasefire. "There is no reason for us to fight anymore. I'm willing to end these hostilities, and allow you to send men who can find out the truth. When they report to you what I have told you, then we can discuss things further, like proper Romans. After all, I doubt you would support the man who is responsible for the death of your emperor." Constantine did not know that Marcellus was engaged to Placidia, or the fact that he had dispatched men to contact the Theodosian loyalists and inform them of what had happened. Though he had acted first, the rebels did not trust him in the slightest. As for the man named Tasius, he crumpled the letter and threw it back at Constantine before fiercely rebuking the man. "I will find out the truth myself. As for you and your barbarian allies, you are not welcome here in Hispania. If you truly desire to end hostilities, leave these lands, or the fighting shall continue." It outraged Constantine when he heard the man was so willing to continue fighting, even after hearing about the death of his emperor. He quickly scolded the man for his foolishness. "Did you not hear me? Honorius is dead and has been deposed by a tyrant. The man has even butchered the Senate. He alone rules in Italia. You should align with me to end his reign of terror once and for all. Yet, you spit on my kindness, and demand I leave the borders of my own empire." Tasius, who was walking back to his own city gates when he heard this, turned around and glared at the man. He pointed up to the archers above and mocked Constantine for his own stupidity. "At any moment, I can give these men a command and have you riddled with arrows. I suggest you think twice before cursing me, Constantine. You may have a white flag, but disrespect me, and I will end you before your armies can save your pitiful existence. Even if this Marcellus has done as you claim, we here in Hispania will still not support you. The atrocities you have committed in your campaign against my people are enough to determine your character. Whether it is you or this alleged tyrant in Ravenna, I swear the people of Hispania will resist the both of you until the bloody end. I suggest you return to your encampment, Constantine, because if you are still standing here by the time I have passed through my city's gates, I will give the order to open fire upon you. I assure you that you will not survive such a thing." After saying this, the man turned around once more and headed back towards his city. Seeing that his attempts at diplomacy had failed, Constantine was enraged, as he spat on the ground in displeasure before turning back towards his own encampment. The moment he crossed into his camp, an officer questioned him. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" Constantine was too angry to be bothered answering the man, and barked orders at his army like a wild hound. "That damn Tasius! If he wants to spit upon my kindness so badly, then I will show him who the true emperor is. Ready the ladders. We assault the city at dawn." The soldiers in Constantine's army did not slack off. The moment the command was given to ready the ladders, the engineers were quickly set to task. They had been waiting outside this city for weeks, and had besieged it 3 times thus far. Each time, the city's defenders repelled them. It was reckless to attack so soon after suffering a major loss, but Constantine was outraged, and needed something or someone to vent his frustrations upon. Thus, the usurper's army did not get a wink of sleep that night. Instead, they were too busy preparing for the battle that would occur the next day. As for the Theodosian loyalists, they had immediately dispatched a rider to head to Italia to confirm whether Honorius was truly dead. They did not care in the slightest about Constantine's attempt at a siege, knowing full well that they had the means to repel his attack yet again. Though it may take weeks, or even months to hear a response from the heartland of the empire, the men who were loyal to the Theodosian dynasty were prepared to fight Constantine to the bitter end. While Constantine was trying to make use of the news of Marcellus' rise to power to compel the Theodosian loyalists to side with him, the Eastern Roman Empire would also learn of these recent events and would have to face a tough decision about how to respond. Chapter 65 The Eastern Roman Empire responds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Yazdegerd I gazed upon the document in his hand with an expression of disbelief. The Western Roman Emperor was dead. Murdered by the hands of his Magister Militum. Though things were not that simple. According to his intelligence, the only reason Olympus had reacted in such a hostile manner to the man he served was because of the rebellion caused by Titus Claudius Marcellus. With the death of Honorius, the Western Roman Empire, or at least part of it, fell into the hands of a usurper. A man who would marry the previous emperor's sister in a desperate attempt to gain some legitimacy. To Yazdegerd I, who was the regent of the current Eastern Roman Emperor. This was an affront to the Theodosian dynasty, and Yazdegerd had half a mind to send her own Magister Militum into the west to reclaim the throne for his charge. It was this fury that drove the man to gather the greatest officers of the Eastern Roman army so that they could discuss their current opportunities. The head general of the Eastern Roman army was a man named Aulus Pontitius Frugi, and he was pointing towards a map that was sprawled out in front of him while declaring what intelligence his army had gathered. From what it appears, the Goths have pulled out of Illyricum and moved into the nearby province Naricum. They appear to be settling the lands under the commands of the usurper Marcellus. This means that they have sworn their loyalties to the man. If we were to march our army on the west, we would first have to get past an army of between 50 and 80,000 Goths who now stand guarded against us on our western border. The only other feasible solution would be to go around this army and march through Germania and into Rhaetia. However, this could prove to be even more disastrous. Yazdegerd did not take this news well. His hands gripped the wooden hair in front of him so tightly that his fingernails left permanent indents inside of it. He gnashed his teeth in displeasure before asking for better alternatives. What about North Africa? Has Carnifex declared his loyalty yet? Frugi shook his head with a bitter expression on his face as he announced what he knew. The man has sworn his loyalty to Marcellus and now guards North Africa with his comitatences. It is unlikely to get him to join our side. The regent of the emperor sighed heavily as he heard this. Things were not looking good. It was at this moment another general spoke up, hoping to heighten the man's mood. He reported on the information his men had received from Marcellus himself. If I may interject, we have received word from the usurper. It appears for the time being he has no hostilities towards us. In fact, the man offers a small gift of 1,000 pounds of gold. While this may not be much to us, it is a substantial sum for the West and its current treasury. He offers this gift in the hopes that we will recognize his claim to the Western Empire and assures us that his interests lie in taking out the other usurper so that he may solidify his claim to the Western throne. The meaning behind this gift is clear. He intends to bribe us into pacification. Yazdegerd was a proud man. Now that his charge was the only remaining successor of the Theodosian dynasty, he would not allow the West to be separate for long. He fully intended to march his armies on Ravenna and reunite the empire beneath his puppet's rule. He found the notion that Marcellus would try to bribe him to be deeply insulting. However, a campaign of that size would be a costly affair. Aside from the losses that she would suffer, the Eastern Roman army would ultimately be forced to leave the northern portion of the empire largely undefended. While the Huns were docile for the time being, there were plenty of barbarians who sought to ravage the empire's borders. The amount of troops he would need to expel the Goths from Noricum was no paltry sum. He could not easily separate his forces from the east without weakening his current position. It was because of this that he bit her nails in anxiety. Naturally, with no clear solution, the generals began to argue with one another on how to proceed. Say we sail our forces from Constantinople to Italia. We will be able to catch Marcellus and his army off guard. I doubt he has the forces required to stave off a direct invasion of the heartland of his empire. It was a good idea in theory, but another general immediately blew the idea out of the water. With what ships? We don't have nearly enough vessels to ferry such a large amount of soldiers across the Mediterranean. The infighting between the generals was getting fierce when Yazdegerd could no longer tolerate it. The man yelled at the top of his lungs, as if he were a barbarian commanding the men to quiet down. Silence. The men gathered in the room followed the man's commands and halted their petty debates. When the room was so silent that one could practically hear a mouse walk by, Yazdegerd spoke about his thoughts. We cannot leave the north undefended, and since the Goths have sworn their allegiance to this usurper, they have abandoned Illyricum. If we don't do something about this soon, we will lose the province to other barbarians. It is clear to me now that if we wish to press our claim, then must get some federati of our own. If that is the case, then I know just the right men for the job. Frugi, I want you to contact the Huns, and entice them to join our side in this conflict. Assure them that they will be well rewarded for their efforts. Everyone knows those foolish Goths are terrified of the Huns. If that is the case, we will use those filthy horsemen to slaughter the usurper's barbarian allies. Naturally, we will send a token force of our own army to assist the Huns in their massacre of the Goths. After all, we can't allow barbarians to run through our lands unsupervised. Does anyone have any objections? The men gathered shook their heads. The Huns were a terrifying and destructive force, but if they could be convinced, then they would make for some powerful mercenaries. When combined with the Byzantine forces, it should be enough to break the Gothic defenses in Noricum. Or so the men thought. Of course, if Marcellus reinforced the Goths in Noricum with his own forces, it was difficult to say who would be victorious. Because of this, Yazdegerd gave the command that would ensure such a scenario would not occur. After we have recruited the Huns, we will wait until Marcellus marches his forces against that fool Constantine. Once he had done so, we will combine our might with our new barbarian allies, and smash the Goths in Noricum. I doubt those filthy Germans will have the spine to stand against the Huns. The various generals nodded their head in agreement. Pressing their claim while they divided the enemy forces was the most likely path to victory. They had no complaints. However, the problem with this plan was it relied on successfully recruiting a large number of Huns to their side. It was because of this that Frugi was quick to voice this possibility. And what if the Huns refuse us? How will we press our claim, then? Yazdegerd did not think of this as a possibility and immediately felt embarrassed by the general and his audacity to question his logic. Rather than simply admit he was wrong and look for a contingency plan, he doubled down on his plan, ensuring that it would be a success. That won't be a problem. Frugi, however, was convinced there was a sufficient enough probability of failure during negotiations that a contingency plan was necessary. Despite earning the contempt of the regent, he pressed him on the issue. And what if it is? This only further enraged the man, but rather than snap in that moment and make a fool of himself, Dhe decided to take a deep breath and calm his nerves before answering the question. If the Huns fail to accept our kindness, then we will be forced to accept Marcellus' bribe until a point where we can divert our forces from the east, to press our claim in the west. Upon hearing this, Frugi nodded his head. The other generals stared at him as if he were the bravest man they had ever witnessed, simply for insisting on an answer to the question they all had in their minds. With this, the Eastern Roman Empire had formed a plan of action on how to deal with Marcellus and his recent rise to power. Chapter 66 Dreams of the Past Part 2 You are listening at novelfull.audio. Frank awoke from his slumber in a state of shock. He had rolled off the sofa he was sleeping on and smacked his head on the floor. Such a jolt immediately woke him up in ways coffee could not. On the reclining seat nearby, his older sister Maria sat with a mocking smile on her face as she feigned her worry. "You okay there, little bro?" Frank wiped the drool from his mouth as he climbed into a standing position. A simple phrase escaped his lips as he gave his elder sister the bird. "Fuck off." Frank was not in the mood for Maria's snide remarks. Though she may be his elder sister, she only ever used the term little bro in a pejorative manner. Maria did not care in the slightest about her brother's crass remark, and continued to watch the television. She was well accustomed to Frank's foul mouth. However, her next words shocked the adolescent youth as he gazed at her with a hint of caution in his dark brown eyes. "So you were out again last night, huh? Is there something I should be telling Mom and Dad?" Frank did not immediately react to this statement, in fear that he might say something that exposed his nightly activities. Recently, he had begun to sneak out after curfew, and though he thought he had been doing a good job keeping this a secret, his crafty elder sister seemed to have learned what he had been up to. In his young mind, Frank thought the best option would be to deny any accusations made against him. "I don't know what you're talking about." Maria merely smiled as she flipped through the channels. Silence existed between the two until eventually she stopped a stereotypical daytime talk show where a teenage girl about Frank's age was visibly pregnant and crying. Frank felt as if the universe was targeting him when he saw this, considering the activities he had engaged in with his girlfriend the night prior. Maria did not instantly take notice of this and instead announced her opinion about the little tramp on the screen. "See, that's why you should always use protection. This dumb little bitch didn't figure that out and now her life is ruined. Promise me, little brother, that you won't be this foolish when you finally find a girl stupid enough to sleep with you." Frank felt as if someone had electrocuted his spine when he heard his sister's words. He instantly became paranoid. Just what did this bitch of a sister know? In his panicked state, he genuinely believed the girl knew that he had been visiting his girlfriend at night while her parents were away on vacation. He awkwardly scratched the back of his neck while trying to deflect from the issue. "I'm not stupid. I know to use protection. Besides, where am I going to find a girl who is into me?" Maria merely laughed when she heard this. While it was true, she thought her clueless little brother lacked the charm necessary to get into a girl's pants, she decided to tease him. After all, that was what she did best. "No. Then how do you explain that hickey on your neck?" "Fucking dumbass, if you're going to lie to me, you should at least cover up the evidence." Rather than calmly think things through and realize that there was no way for there to be a hickey on his neck, since he and his girlfriend didn't do things like that. Frank panicked and looked in the mirror, where he discovered his sister was just testing him. Her mouth widened in disbelief as she threw a throw pillow at him before scolding him for his scandalous actions. "You little shit. When mom and dad find out what you're up to, they're going to freak out. Oh, I can't wait to see the looks on their faces when they realize that their beloved honor student of a son is actually a little womanizer. Frank merely scoffed before throwing the pillow back at his sister. If she was going to threaten to reveal his little secret, then he was not going to play nice. He immediately responded to his sister by revealing her own scandalous secret. Oh please, sister, do not sit there and act like you're a fucking saint. I know about your little hobby with the webcam. I'm sure our parents would be far more concerned about your transgressions than mine. If you say one word about the fact that I'm sleeping with my girlfriend, I will show them your videos. Maria glared daggers at her little brother. If looks could kill, he would be a dead man. The fact that he had discovered her dirty secret made the girl livid, and she immediately went off the rails. You little creep. Do you get off on my videos? You are so disgusting. You better not say a word to mom and dad, or I will cut your nuts off while you sleep. Before Frank could make a proper remark, the door opened, revealing his father, who was dressed in camouflage and had a dead buck in his hands. He did not even observe the situation before calling out to his son. Well, look who decided to wake up today. If you weren't so comatose this morning, I would have dragged you out hunting with me. Now be useful for once in your life and help me butcher this damn thing. Frank immediately groaned while Maria teased him. Off you go and remember what we talked about. Frank merely raised his middle finger again, before following his father into the basement where the two of them butchered the buck over a couple of beers. The man noticed the tension between his young son and his older sister, and inquired about it. You two fighting again? Frank merely scoffed as he took a sip from his beer before making a light-hearted remark. When are we not? Marco was busy skinning the buck while pressing further into the issue. It was not good for his two children to continue fighting like this. You want to talk about it? In response to this, Frank merely shook his head, and picked up his skinning knife, working on the other end of the freshly hunted deer. Not really, Marco could only sigh before expressing his thoughts on the matter. One day, your mother and I will pass away from this world, and it will only be you and your sister. Granted, you both will probably end up having families of your own, but it would be a sad thing for you and your sister to not even be on speaking terms. You should try to get along with her. Frank laughed at this remark before expressing his views on the matter. Oh, don't worry, old man, I'm sure I will die before the rest of you. Lord knows this world has it out for me. Marco looked at his son with a pitiful expression before shaking his head. He immediately scolded the boy for his comments. Your sense of humor is fucked up, you know that. In response to this, Frank could only chuckle before shoving the blame onto his father. Oh yeah. Where do you think I learned it from? The two men broke out into laughter as the father admitted defeat. All right, I'll give you that one. Marcellus awoke from his sleep and stared around the room. It was strange. Normally, his visions included some kind of information that was valuable to him. However, all he had were confused thoughts. Some of the words mentioned in this dream were alien to him, but he still understood the meaning behind them. He did not know how to rationalize this. What he witnessed was so beyond his understanding, and yet at the same time, he comprehended it very clearly. What was this world that he kept dreaming of? Was it truly visions from the gods? Or something else entirely? As time went on, these dreams became a more frequent occurrence. If this vision did not include the same characters from his previous ones, Marcellus would have believed it to be just an average dream. He was in a state of existential crisis as he sat on the edge of his bed, in the darkness. Siegfried lay asleep next to him, entirely unaware of the turmoil that was going through the man's mind. Whatever was happening to him, it was slowly warping his perspective on life. He could tell that something was changing deep within his mind, but he did not know what it was. In the end, Marcellus realized he could do nothing about this and sighed heavily before taking a drink of the wine that sat on his nightstand. After consuming the beverage in its entirety, he lied back down and struggled to fall back to sleep. The meaning of these visions, and the impact they had on his life, would have to be indulged a later date. There were important matters of state to attend to, and he could not sit idly by and decipher the meanings of his dreams all day. Thus, after some deep breaths, Marcellus found himself ensnared by the warm hands of unconsciousness. His mind fading into the darkness, before revealing another dream. Luckily for him, this time it was not a memory of his past life, but a normal occurrence. Chapter 67 Purging Corruption. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Marcellus was sitting in his study, signing what appeared to be an arrest warrant. After becoming the embodiment of government authority in the Western Roman Empire, Marcellus had become increasingly aware of the extent that corruption plagued the ranks of society. Embezzlement, bribery, nepotism, extortion, lobbying, and outright incompetency could be found in every corner of the empire. It was truly sickening, and something needed to be done about this. It was becoming apparent that Marcellus would need to make an example of the profligates and corrupt officials that were spread across his realm. It was because of this that Marcellus had tasked his army with the purpose of arresting every corrupt and incompetent bureaucrat within the Western Roman Empire. He would not spare the cancer that had long since begun to rot away at the realm. The list of arrest warrants Marcellus had signed after gaining a list of names from his spies filled the desk as if it were a small mountain of parchment. The purpose was to interrogate these individuals and have them sell out their comrades. After they had given up their fellow conspirators, they would be sentenced to execution via crucifixion. Ordius, who was present to witness the signing of these warrants, gazed upon the substantial stack of documents and could no longer hold his tongue. He quickly spoke up about the absurdity of arresting so many individuals, especially those who helped the government function. There must be at least 1,000 arrest warrants here. Do you really believe it is wise to detain and interrogate so many people? To this Marcellus merely scoffed before signing another arrest warrant and adding it to the pile. He did not even look Ordius in the eye as he reported the crime this specific man was guilty of. Look at this. Even our manufactorums are suffering from blatant corruption. These bastards are now using tin to make scales for the Larica squamata and replacing every third iron scale with these fake products so that they can make a greater profit off of my rearmament campaign. These faulty scales will cost our soldiers their lives. It is simply unacceptable. This man must be made an example of. After you have interrogated him about those who are involved in this fraud, have him crucified in the center of Ravenna like the rest. Ordius did not know what to say. It was true that the level of corruption that existed within the borders of the empire was extensive, but fighting a war against corruption was a losing battle in his eyes. The general truly believed that they could never fully stamp such things out of society. However, all he could do was sigh and nod his head as he picked up another warrant and read the charge aloud. Wanted for stealing oxen from Roman citizens and selling them to the army for a premium. Oh, come on, how can this possibly be a thing? Marcellus did not immediately respond. He just handed another arrest warrant over to the man and allowed him to read it aloud to further prove his point. Wanted for bribing a church official so that he can marry his sister. Ordius began pulling arrest warrants left and right, and it appeared that every time he did, some new crazy form of corruption appeared. All he could do was sigh heavily and admit defeat. All right, I get it. I'll have the men on these warrants arrested and interrogated, but don't even think about arresting the clergy. You do not want to anger the church. Marcellus remained silent and added another arrest warrant to the pile before sighing heavily. Oh, don't worry, there may be a day that will come where the church must face a reckoning for its sins, but that is not today. For the time being, they will prove useful in keeping people in line. Ordius could only sigh as he walked off from the scene, ordering a few guards to get all the arrest warrants that were piled so that they could properly apprehend the criminals. He could not believe that so many people engaged in such blatant corruption. After Ordius was gone, Placidia entered the study with a platter of food in her hands. She handed some of it off to Marcellus, who dined on the meal with gusto. He could use a break from writing so many warrants. As for Placidia, she gazed at the list of arrest warrants and shook her head before condemning her brother's inefficient rule. It is amazing that the empire is still standing after the failure of my brother's reign. I can't believe he allowed such extensive corrupt to exist all over his empire. He truly was an absolute disgrace. Marcellus smirked as he heard this before making a rather crass remark about the young woman's father. To be fair, your father was a terrible emperor as well. Placidia did not know what to say in response to this. The Theodosian dynasty had proven to be ineffective in its rule. She was honestly ashamed of her family's lack of ability to properly govern the empire. Then again, was it worse to have a madman as an emperor like Caligula, or someone who was woefully incompetent like Honorius? After thinking about this for a while, the girl shook her head in silence. She no longer bothered trying to think of her family's failure and instead tried to cheer up her fiancé. Well, at least we have you to look out for us. I'm sure our dynasty will be better than my father's. Marcellus remained silent as he grabbed more of the food that Placidia had prepared for him. He did not know how long his reign would last, or even if his heir would succeed him. However, he was determined to do everything in his ability to bring the empire back on the right path. To do that, he would need to purge the extensive corruption that ate away at the life force of the empire. Then he would need to wage a war against Constantine and reclaim the westernmost portion of the empire. After doing that, he would have to deal with the Eastern Roman Empire in some fashion. These were just the major concerns of his. There were other issues he would have to deal with as emperor. For example, quelling rebellion would be a big concern. He was already unpopular as most of the people who lived in the Western Roman army were upset that he was a usurper, and that he conscripted so many young men into his army, so that they could be used as a bludgeon against his rivals. If foreign adversaries, and open rebellion were not concerning enough, Marcellus knew he would also have to face barbarian raids into his lands. This had been a problem plaguing Rome for centuries, and he currently lacked the means to effectively deter the overwhelming majority of Germanic tribes that occasionally crossed the borders. If he managed to successfully reunite the Western and Eastern empires, then he would have to face all of these difficulties on an even grander scale. After seeing just how inept the Roman bureaucracy had become, Marcellus was beginning to understand why Rome had failed to raise a single decent emperor since the death of Constantine the Great. What madman would ever dream of doing all of this work? It took Marcellus a matter of seconds to think about all these issues in his mind before he sighed heavily and petted the hair of his young fiancée. I will do my best. However, I can't do this alone. I need capable people, who I can trust to step up and take action. One man can't save an empire. To do this, I first need to be rid of the corruption that plagues the realm. Hopefully, after I have exposed and condemned these sinners, I can convince the more capable people in our society to work alongside me for a better future. Placidia nodded her head. She agreed with what the man was saying. If corruption and incompetency was allowed to exist freely in the empire, then good men would do nothing, and sit by and wait as the empire slowly bled to death. While the wicked rose to positions of prominence and benefited off of the demise of their nation. Thus, even though she knew that each name written on these warrants would ultimately result in a crucifixion, she did not shed any tears. These men had bribed, embezzled, lobbied and extorted their way to positions of power within society, and it was the time for a despot to remove them from their lofty positions and make an example of them. With a warm smile on her face, Placidia assured Marcellus that he was doing the right thing. L.rg. These men are a blight on our society. With their deaths the plague that rots away at the core of our empire will be removed, and can then be treated with competent and loyal men who share your vision for a glorious Rome. I just hope their deaths do not spark a rebellion. Especially so soon after you have claimed the throne for yourself. Marcellus wore a stoic expression as he espoused his view on the matter with a confident tone. If the plebeians are whipped up into a frenzy over the deaths of a few corrupt patricians in such a state that they would openly rebel against my rule, then they deserve to suffer the same fate as their masters. With the new Roman emperor signed away the torture, interrogation, and execution of thousands of corrupt and incompetent bureaucrats, in the following days they would be arrested and condemned to their fates. Chapter 68 Butchering Rome. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Noel dem Frank ran down the stairs of his house in the mid-evening. He was about to go out and shoot some fireworks with his friends. The boys had gotten hold of some prime explosives, and he wanted to mess around with them. However, the moment he descended the stairs, he spotted his mother cooking dinner. Normally, his elder sister Maria assisted the woman, but she was nowhere to be seen. Being the filial son that he was, Frank immediately noticed that his mother was overwhelmed with the amount of food she was cooking. He sighed heavily before asking his mother where his bitch of an elder sister was. "Mom, where's Maria at? Shouldn't she be helping you with dinner?" The woman sighed heavily and shook her head before scolding her errant daughter. "Your sister is out with her friends again, and on Sunday night nonetheless. I swear ever since that girl entered college she has become an entirely different person." Though Frank was about to do the same thing, it was a family tradition for the women to get together and cook a nice family meal on Sundays. Frank knew little about the ways of cooking, but could perform the basics. The boy could not stand to see his mother so disappointed. Because of this, he quickly pulled out his phone and texted his friends that he wouldn't be able to make it before taking off his coat and hanging it in a chair. After doing so, he rolled up his sleeves and took up a knife, where he began to help his mother with the meal preparation. The woman was surprised to see her son was helping and patted him on the head before teasing him. "Look who is Mommy's little helper." Frank merely smiled. Unlike his father, he did not speak back to his mother. He had too much respect for her. In an era where less and less women were faithful to their husbands, his mother continued to be the glue that kept his family together. Currently, the woman was in the middle of making the sauce, which Frank was instantly curious about. "Is that Alfredo? I've always wondered how you make it. Though I never knew that you made it fresh." The woman smiled as she quickly instructed her son how she made her homemade Alfredo sauce. The woman grabbed hold of her boy's cheeks and pinched them before teasing him once more. "You want to learn Mommy's secret recipe? Very well, since you are being such a good boy this evening, I suppose I will show you. I start by warming up the butter and cream in a large saucepan with low heat, where I let it simmer for 2 minutes. If it is boiling, you've gone too far. After that, I add in the fresh garlic that I have sautéed in butter as well as other seasonings such as salt, pepper, Italian seasoning, dried basil, oregano, and onion powder. From there, I whisk it for about a minute while the garlic cooks. After doing all of this, it's a simple matter of adding freshly shredded Parmesan cheese to the mix, and stir until it is melted and smooth. Now that you know, why don't you cut up that chicken? We will then cook it and add it to the mix. Then you can eat your mother's homemade chicken Alfredo." Frank smiled as he worked alongside his mother to create the creamy noodle dish. They worked in tandem for some time until the meal was complete. They sat around the table for a few minutes before Frank's mother received a text message. It was a notice from her husband that he would be staying at work late for the night and to eat without him. She immediately began to pout. Noticing this, Frank was already aware of what happened, and hugged his mother in an attempt to comfort her. "Don't worry, Mom, you still have me here." The woman wore a pretty smile before serving up the food. She was happy knowing that her son had decided to cancel his plans to eat dinner with her. "That's right, I will always have my little Frankie boy to look after me." Frank chuckled lightly as he and his mother said prayers before taking a bite from his meal. The intense flavor of the chicken Alfredo immediately caused the dream to end, and Marcellus to wake up from his nap with a large strain of drool coating his documents. The dream was extremely vivid, as was the process of how to cook the meal. He had no choice. Marcellus knew he would not be satisfied until he tasted this dish for real. Luckily for him, there were a few chickens that the idiot Honorius kept around the palace that he could butcher to sate his desire. As such, he quickly left his office and entered the yard where the chickens sat and played around. Marcellus grabbed Honorius' favorite chicken, whose name was Rome, and dragged it off to be beheaded. With the swing of a hatchet, the prized possession of the previous emperor was decapitated. With its death, Marcellus had begun to butcher it thoroughly, first by removing its feathers so all that remained was skin, and then by cutting off the breast. Once the white meat was fully removed from the chicken, he brought it to his slave, Sigefrida, who was already in the kitchen. She gazed upon the gory scene with shock before mocking Marcellus for his actions. "Did you just butcher Rome? Isn't that a bad omen? After all, it shares the same name as your precious city." Marcellus merely chuckled at the woman's joke before handing over the fresh meat. "Put this on the grill, will you? I plan to take some of our food stores and make us a unique treat." Sigefrida was surprised to see that Marcellus was willing to cook, but sure enough he had fired up the stove and raided the pantry where he made use of locally produced cheese, dairy cream, and the other herbs that were necessary to reconstruct the meal he had tasted in his dream. Though he did not know what Parmesan was, he knew from the dream it was some form of cheese, thus he made use of what he had to make the tasty Alfredo sauce. Sigefrida could smell the savory aroma of the Alfredo sauce and was surprised. It was not something she had ever encountered before. However, she did not ask what Marcellus was up to, and instead grilled the chopped chicken breast for him. Once it was complete, Marcellus mixed it together. Unfortunately, pasta did not exist yet, and because of that, he could not make the exact food he had tasted in his dream. Instead, it turned into a creamy chicken soup. With the food fully prepared, Marcellus served 3 bowls, one for himself, one for Placidia, and one for Sigefrida. Once he and Sigefrida had sat down, he called out to the missing girl with a voice so loud it echoed in the halls. "Placidia, get your ass in here. It's lunchtime." Within moments, he could hear the sound of footsteps descending from the stairs until the sight of the young woman rushing through the door caught his eye. Placidia looked at the food, and was quite surprised to see that it was not something she recognized. She quickly asked what the food was as she sniffed its savory aroma. "What is this?" Marcellus merely smiled before informing the girl of the name of the dish. "It is a new creation. I saw it in a dream. It is called chicken Alfredo. Come, taste it and give me your honest opinion." The trio sat down at the table and feasted upon the bowls of chicken Alfredo soup. They were surprised when they tasted it. It was so much better than anything they had ever tasted before. The Romans had relatively bland food that would normally be considered inedible by modern standards. Things such as field mice and flamingo tongues were considered a delicacy by the Roman elite. However, Marcellus had an advantage nobody else seemed to have. He received dreams of his past life while he slept. Who knew they would extend to the culinary arts? Unfortunately, he was lacking in several things, such as basil, pasta, onion powder, etc. However, he had some garlic on hand, as well as salt, pepper, and oregano. So it wasn't a total wash. Though the dish wasn't quite the same as he remembered in his dream, it was a close enough amalgamation, which the 2 young women by his side seemed to enjoy as they dined on the creamy soup with fat smiles on their pretty faces. Placidia could hardly contain her joy as she exclaimed her thoughts aloud. "This is the best thing I have ever tasted." As for Sigefrida, she could not help but agree. She nodded her head silently while eating the meal with as much grace as a mere slave could manage. Upon seeing that they both thought it was tasty as he did, Marcellus came up with another bold idea for income. He planned to open up stalls which served this new meal, and whatever else he may dream of in the coming days. He was beginning to think he might become the founder of a new era of Roman cuisine. Chapter 69 The Theodosian rebels arrive at Ravenna. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In the city of Ravenna, a group of men from Hispania were approaching the palace. For the past few weeks, they had sat back and observed the ongoing changes in the city. To their surprise, Marcellus had enacted a brutal campaign to purge corruption from the Roman bureaucracy, and make an example of those who engaged in such crimes. Crucifixion after crucifixion lined the city streets, as thousands of citizens had been executed in a public display of authority. These men and women were guilty of crimes involving government corruption. During this time of mass incarceration and execution, the public had grown both fearful of their new emperor, and resentful towards him. They did not dare to speak out in resistance openly, but many of the more wealthy patricians who were not already on the chopping block had begun their conspiracies to remove this new tyrant from his throne of lies. As for the delegation dispatched by the Theodosian loyalists, they had heard rumors that Placidia was still alive, and had agreed to marry this new tyrant. This created a complex issue in the minds of the Theodosian loyalists. To side with Marcellus was to side with a usurper, but he was a usurper who would soon be married to the last of Theodosius' children. At the very least, his claim to the Western Roman throne was more legitimate than Constantine's. To get to the bottom of their decision, they had decided to meet with this new self-proclaimed emperor in person, to get a good judgment of his character, and his relationship with the Roman princess. The man leading this delegation was named Manius Camillus Rufrius, and he currently stood defiant in front of Marcellus, refusing to kneel to a man who he did not yet recognize as emperor. Marcellus merely smirked as he sat upon his throne and gazed at the delegation of Theodosian loyalists. He did not expect them to pay him a visit on their own accord, and yet here they stood. He would normally show these men a sense of hospitality, but as it currently stood, they were technically rebels against his rule. Thus, by simply listening to their words, he was showing them hospitality. Rufrius cleared his throat as he gazed upon Placidia, who stood by Marcellus' side. Placidia, if this man has forced himself upon you, or coerced you into marrying him, please let me know, and I will do everything in my power to resist his rule. It shocked Placidia when she heard this. Was this how everyone saw her betrothal? A forced marriage for the sake of political convenience. She gazed over towards Marcellus, who was scowling. He simply could not bite his tongue any longer and scolded the men who acted so brazenly in his palace. Is this how you treat me after the kindness I have shown you? You storm into my palace without notice, and accuse me of forcing myself upon a young girl not yet of age. You then question the legitimacy of our relationship and swear to resist my rule. Should it not be to your liking? Who the hell do you think you are? If I did not seek to gain Hispania's help in putting down Constantine's rebellion, I would have your tongue removed. The Theodosian delegate flinched when he heard such a vicious response. Meanwhile, Placidia wore a warm smile on her face. She was glad that Marcellus had stood up for her. She glared at the men from Hispania before chastising them for their remarks. What do you know of our current situation? My brother Honorius unlawfully executed his Magister Militum, and put an end to the lives of tens of thousands of people when they became concerned about his actions. He kidnapped Marcellus' mother and forced him to choose between his life, or rebellion. Despite the fact that my brother treated the woman with unnecessary cruelty, ultimately resulting in her death, Marcellus did not demand that the citizens of the city give him Honorius' head. When Marcellus stormed the palace, that snake Olympus turned his blade on my brother and took his life. In the chaos that followed, Marcellus took command, and has since led Rome to a state of stability. He did not compel me in any way to agree to his proposal. I accepted it because I wanted to. If you are truly loyal men to my father's dynasty, then you will bend the knee to this man, and recognize his legitimacy as the Western Roman Emperor. He did not ask for the position he currently has, but fate has led him to it. The men stood in shock as they heard what had transpired straight from the mouth of a member of the dynasty they were loyal to. They had suspected for some time that Marcellus had risen in rebellion simply because he wanted power, much like Constantine. They had no way of knowing the scandalous actions Honorius had taken that led up to the rebellion. Rufrius bowed his head in apology as he bent down on one knee. If what Placidia had said was true, then he would do his best to ensure the loyalty of the Theodosian rebels who fought against Constantine in Hispania. Placidia, I am sorry for offending you, and you as well, Marcellus. If what you have both said is true, then I swear I will do everything in my power to convince my comrades to work alongside you in the removal of the usurper Constantine. However, there is something you should know. We have been in the city for a few weeks and have observed the reactions of the people who dwell within Ravenna. There are those who conspire against you. They see you as a vicious tyrant who has butchered the Senate, and is rounding up anyone who questions your legitimacy and executing them en masse. These concerns cannot be ignored, and will have to be explained to my comrades if you wish to gain our support. Marcellus ground his teeth as he heard about this. More rebels, just what he needed. He could only sigh in dismay as he responded to these allegations with a confident tone in his voice. The Senate was corrupt and sought to use its influence to overtake the position that I had fought and bled for. The men who you see crucified in the streets are those who have engaged in bribery, extortion, embezzlement, nepotism, and other means of corruption. I am cleaning up the dregs of society who have brought our empire to its current state of near collapse. For those who wish to rebel against me, I will deal with them. You can be rest assured. Rufrius nodded his head as he heard this. If Marcellus had assumed complete authority so that he could expunge the criminal and corrupt elements of society that were currently bleeding the empire dry, then he supposed he could support such actions for the time being. No matter what, Marcellus was a superior candidate to Constantine to rule over the Western Roman Empire. Though they may be loyalists to the Theodosian dynasty, these men did not want the young boy Theodosius II ruling over the West. Such a thing would be disastrous. Rome needed a strong and powerful figure to unite behind, and since Honorius was dead, and Constantine was a failure, they were left with the man who had usurped the throne. At least they could rest easy knowing that he would marry the daughter of Theodosius I. With this in mind, Rufrius responded to Marcellus' claims with a satisfactory answer. So long as you deal with these rebels amid your empire, then I suppose there is no concern to be had. Tell me, when do you plan to march on Constantine? The man has been a thorn in our side for some time now. Marcellus thought about it for a few moments before giving the man an answer. Come summer of next year, I will march my army into Gaul. I need time to prepare my grain stores and to train my new conscripts. If Constantine still remains in Hispania, we can catch him in the mountain passes where our two forces combined will eliminate him and his Frankish allies. I expect to see you and your comrades to show up in force. Once Constantine is dead, I expect you all to kneel before me and unite the Western Roman Empire once more. Rufrius nodded his head in agreement with this plan, before expressing his desire to help. If that is your strategy, I will relay it to the leaders of the rebellion in Hispania, and will do my best to convince them to aid you. Unless there is anything else that you wish to discuss, we will be on our way. Marcellus did not bother to keep the delegates around any longer, and quickly gave them permission to return to their homeland. Go on and give your leaders my regards. I look forward to working with you in the summer to end Constantine's rebellion once and for all. With this said, Marcellus had gained the support of the Theodosian rebels. The true origins of Honorius' demise remained buried beneath the palace. Anyone who knew the truth and still drew breath was a sworn supporter of Marcellus and his dynasty. As for the rebels in his midst, Marcellus would need more information on who they were, and what they were planning before he could take their lives. Chapter 70 Expanding the Frumentarii. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Marcellus sat in his office. Standing across from him were various men hand-picked from his legions. These were men with talents in scouting and espionage. These men were his frumentarii. With the threats of conspiracies around every corner, Marcellus realized he needed to establish a dedicated force involved with intelligence and espionage. Until now, that role had been left up to the frumentarii, who were a group of Roman soldiers attached to various military units which conducted espionage while in uniform. However, with recent events, and the stability of his empire at risk, Marcellus desired to expand the frumentarii and their influence into society, by having them infiltrate conspiracy networks and bring them down from the inside. If Marcellus did not know who his internal enemies were, he could not face them. Thus, He had gathered his best units who had experience in these fields, and brought them to his study intending to gain their opinions on how best to reform the frumentarii to fit the empire's current needs. With a serious expression on his face, Marcellus outlined his vision for the future of the frumentarii in a passionate speech. Gentlemen, I have gathered you here today because you are the best damn frumentarii I have at my disposal. I won't lie to you. The situation is grim. Our empire is facing multiple potential invasions into our homeland, all while the patricians, who are unsatisfied with my rule, gather in secret and conspire to unseat me from my throne. The reality of the situation is that the frumentarii are not equipped appropriately with the resources and training necessary to handle these internal conflicts that are bound to appear under my reign. It is because of that I wish to expand your units into a dedicated spy network. My vision is for the frumentarii is to be separate from the military. You shall coordinate with military operatives to gather intelligence on the enemy, but shall also now conduct clandestine operations among the civilian population of both our own empire and the civilizations that threaten us. This transition from military operatives who specialize in espionage to dedicated spies will be a difficult one, and because of that, I have gathered you all here to hear your input. So tell me, what would be the most efficient way to reform the frumentarii? The men who were gathered in this room had various expressions on their face. Some were nervous to speak, and others were critical of the idea of expansion. However, what Marcellus said was true. The frumentarii lacked the ability to infiltrate conspiracies and dismantle them from within. It was because of this that they chatted amongst themselves for a bit before coming up with a list of ideas to implement. After conversing for a few minutes, one man in particular, whose name was Drusus Oticilius Falconius, took charge and voiced the opinions of the group. If we are screening for new frumentarii, then ideally, it should contain people who are at the very least educated in reading, writing, and basic mathematics. So we will have a very limited talent pool to choose from. If we are to become a separate force from the army, then we should have separate training that is specialized in the tasks of infiltration, assassination, sabotage, and espionage. Aside from this, the identities of the frumentarii must be concealed, as it would be difficult to infiltrate foreign realms and internal conspiracies with our identities as agents of espionage being well known. Marcellus took note of these suggestions and wrote them down. He took nothing these experts said for granted. Falconius continued on his speech about how they should be organized. I think the frumentarii should operate in cells based in different regions. That way, if the identities of one group are compromised, the others will not come under suspicion. They should have a contact within the palace who they can relay information to in secret, and potentially develop methods to communicate securely. The group of frumentarii and the emperor worked long and hard on the development of a network of spies dedicated to espionage. After hours of discussion, they finally came up with a basic premise for this new and improved frumentarii. Marcellus planned to immediately use these suggestions to establish his spy network. The problem was that he needed someone he could trust to lead it from the shadows. If the frumentarii were to be reorganized into something resembling a modern intelligence agency, then it needed someone at the top. Someone fiercely loyal to him, who was intelligent and could make difficult decisions. Someone who would be the least likely person suspected of being in charge of the shadowy organization. There were not many people that Marcellus could trust, and if he really thought about it, there was only one person who could meet the qualifications. Thus, after dismissing his agents, Marcellus approached the person in question who was currently in the process of cooking the evening meal for the members of the palace. This person was none other than Siegfrieda. For some time now, Marcellus had planned to free her from her bondage, and officially take her as his concubine. However, there was a more important role for her to fulfill now. In his mind, nobody was less likely to be suspected of being in charge of his spy network than her. For starters, she was not Roman by birth. Instead, she was a Swabi woman who had lived most of her life as a slave. In the eyes of many, she was nothing more than a hot piece of ass that Marcellus was sleeping with. Her abilities were greatly underestimated by all who knew her. The reality was different from the perspective people had. Siegfrieda was educated from a young age, at the behest of Marcellus. She was not only literate, but highly intelligent, and had a head for the big picture. After all, he had been sharing his ideas with her since he was a young officer in the Roman army, and she was at times able to make valuable contributions to his rise to power. More importantly, Siegfrieda understood geopolitics, spoke multiple languages, and had experienced the horrors of war as a companion. On top of all of this, she was a woman, and because of that, nobody in or out of the empire would suspect her of having a prominent position in Marcellus' dictatorship. Frankly, Marcellus had already thrown Roman law out the window after succeeding the throne. Since that was the case, he had no qualms about giving the position of his spymaster to a woman. The moment Marcellus entered the room, Siegfrieda could tell by the look on his face that he wanted to discuss something important. She quickly halted her actions and approached the man, where he reached around her neck and unlocked her collar. This action surprised the woman, as it was the symbol of her enslavement. With a warm smile on his face, Marcellus informed the woman that she was now a free woman. "I should have done this a long time ago, but now that I am emperor, I hereby grant you your freedom, Siegfrieda. You are free to do whatever you desire in this life, and should you care for it, I will grant you Roman citizenship." Siegfrieda welled up in tears, not because she was happy about being freed, but because she had misunderstood her master's intent. She quickly began pounding away at his chest in rage while screaming at him. "You bastard! After everything we have done together, you are now throwing me away. How could you do this to me? Is it because of Placidia? Did she put you up to this?" It shocked Marcellus to see the woman behave in such an irrational manner. He quickly grabbed hold of her and hugged her tightly, primarily so that she could no longer strike him, and whispered in her dainty ears. "Shug, foolish woman, I have no intentions of throwing you away. Instead, I wish to take you as my concubine so that our future children won't suffer the cruel fate of slavery. I also intend to give you a job more fitting for a woman of your intelligence, that is, if you are willing." Siegfrieda gazed up into Marcellus' olive-green eyes and sniffled. When she heard she wasn't being abandoned, she was no longer filled with rage, but joy. After calming herself down, Siegfrieda asked about the position he had talked about. "What's the job?" Marcellus smiled as he kissed the woman on the forehead. Only after he had done that did he inform her of the task he had in mind. "I am reorganizing my Frumentarii into a shadowy organization that spies on the public and our enemies alike. They will no longer wear military uniforms, and overtly engage in espionage, but hide in the shadows and infiltrate our enemies. I need someone I can trust, someone who is educated, and someone who has a mind for these matters. Truthfully, the list of candidates is small, and so naturally I have turned to my beloved slave, concubine." Siegfrieda was shocked to hear this. It was a lofty position and Roman women were not permitted to hold public office. That was the caveat. This was not a public office, but a private one, hidden from the public at large. Still, she did not expect the men of the Frumentarii to accept her so easily. After all, she was a woman. "But I'm a woman," Marcellus merely scoffed as he lifted a nearby chalice and filled it with wine. After taking a sip, he responded to the woman's concerns with a confident smile on his face. "Do you think I give a shit? Siegfrieda, in my brief time as emperor, I have practically shat on every Roman law there is. Right now, I'm nothing more than a tyrant doing as I please. The old laws mean nothing. Clearly they haven't been working. If I want a woman as my spymaster, I will damn well have one. Besides, you won't be alone. I plan to recruit women into the organization. There's not many educated women in this empire, but we can teach them. I highly doubt my enemies will expect women to be agents of my Frumentarii. So what do you say?" Siegfrieda did not easily answer this question and instead put it off for a later date. "I need some time to think about this. I will let you know when I decide." Marcellus nodded his head in agreement before petting the woman's platinum blonde hair. Take all the time you need. After saying this, he departed, leaving the Swaby beauty alone with many thoughts to dwell upon.